now in the middle of an air raid on the palace. There is considerable panic all around us now.
In a world shaped by conflict and change, few moments resonate like the closing chapter of war. It's not just the end of a battle or the surrender of armies. It's the closing of a chapter in the lives of millions. The Vietnam War, a conflict that tore nations apart and left scars that will never truly fade. On April 30th, 1975, the city of Saigon fell to the North Vietnamese forces, bringing an end to the Vietnam War.
This is a historic moment, the arrival of the North Vietnamese regular army in Saigon. Here they are pouring down the main avenue. Further up there is the American embassy. At this end of the avenue is the former presidential palace, which President Thieu left just over a week ago, and from which General Min has today announced that he will unconditionally hand over to the new regime.
A conflict that deeply impacted not only Vietnam, but also the United States and the rest of the world. The Fall of Saigon marked the end to a brutal and long-lasting war, one that claimed the lives of millions, uprooted families, and shaped the global political landscape for decades to come. For many, that day in 1975 was a symbol of both defeat and hope. The conflict's resolution led to the reunification of Vietnam under communist rule, while simultaneously sparking a massive wave of immigration, especially to the United States, where many refugees sought safety and a new beginning. Nearly 45 years later, scenes reminiscent of the Fall of Saigon played out at Kabul's Hamid Karzai International Airport. Thousands of Afghans desperate to escape the Taliban rushed to the airport, leading to overcrowded and extremely dangerous conditions. One of the most striking images and videos that people saw were of human beings clinging to the sides of U.S. aircraft as they took off. To commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Fall of Saigon, Operation Allies Refuge Foundation, in partnership with the Fall of Saigon Marines Association, have brought together Marines from both historic events to tell their stories. Despite the generational gap, there are many similarities that need to be shared, and their stories will provide insight into the emotional and logistical challenges that they faced during these pivotal moments in history.
Americans and other foreigners lined up at installations around Saigon waiting for buses would be huge. For most of those who wanted to leave their country, this would be their last chance.
My name is Bill Newell. When I was in Vietnam, I was a sergeant. I was with the Marine Security Guards, volunteered to go to Vietnam after school. So we went through all the embassy school and served with the Secret Service for a short time, and then volunteered to go to Vietnam because it was a hardship post, and thought, well, if I get through a year there, I can go have some choices of where I want to go after. So that was my setup, and arrived in Vietnam around May 5th, 1975, and served Detachment Saigon. So it was a Marine Security Guard Battalion, Company C, and was Detachment Saigon I was assigned to. There were a lot of negotiations with the U.S. government about what was going to happen there. Was it going to be a coalition government? The forces kept moving south. There wasn't any resolution politically. They overran the Central Highlands. They took Da Nang. They moved south, took Nha Trang. Beginning of April, maybe latter part of March, we had 16 divisions of NVA which were moving upon us, both coming down from the north and in the southern Delta area. So the embassy started to make plans for the evacuation. If it did go, was going to go out of Tan Son Nhut Air Base. Tan Son Nhut Air Base was probably 3 to 5 miles from the embassy building itself. The embassy building was maybe 2 blocks from the presidential palace. As things progressed, there didn't seem to be any resolution. The U.S. government decided that they would start making preparations for the evacuation. We're seeing some contact out in the periphery of Saigon, Bien Hoa, and so forth are starting to get hit. So when the North Vietnamese moved down south, what was happening was there was a lot of negotiations with the U.S. government around financial support, because after the Paris Peace Accords, the government decided that they just weren't going to provide any more financial aid, no more military munitions, no more military support. The North Vietnamese at that time, along with the Viet Cong, were very, very active. As the North Vietnamese came down, they were taking out all the South Vietnamese units to the point where the South Vietnamese military units were so overwhelmed, basically they were trying to move south out of the way, and they were just being decimated. We're now dealing with Tan Son Nhut. We're trying to process people out. People are getting more and more panicked. The best way to put it is they're doing more and more probing. You know, they want to see how hard the defenses are, I guess. And then it escalates where now we're getting further into April. We're processing lots and lots of people out of Tan Son Nhut. We're at a point where the North Vietnamese began to fire howitzers, large guns, at the airport. So their intention was to basically disable the airport. One night we were hit very heavily. We had C-130s burning on the strip. We had some rockets come in. We had a small detachment of Marines that were trying to help out there, and they took a direct from an RPG. That was Charlie McMahon and Darwin Judge. We got word that they were killed out there. We realized that we couldn't evacuate anymore for the airport, so we had to go from the embassy. It was never an option to go from the embassy, so now people are scared. The civilian population is panicked. We've got South Vietnamese forces which have deserted. They've been decimated in points north of us. There was a lot of desertion, so we had forces in the streets which are armed. So remember our priority of evacuees, we knew who we needed to take. There were a lot more people that we needed to take that we couldn't take. So now we had people staged in the compound. Helicopters are coming in on the roof, into the parking lot. So at this point, you know, our concern is you got 46s landing on the roof. We're not sure that they can handle the load, but they're landing on the roof. And it's very dangerous getting them up the stairwell, getting them onto the rooftop, and then up a ladder to a small helo pad to get on to the back of a helicopter. So this is very high, and you've got people who are freaked out by the height of it. And down below, we've got these CH-53s coming in. The most amazing thing to me was the pilotage. When I look back on it, I just can't believe what these pilots were doing. They were flying in foul weather. They were flying in darkness. We had the parking lot and the embassy lit up by car lights so that when they came down, they could see where they were going. And they would come straight down, probably from 500 to 800 feet, and on the rooftop too, and try to land as lightly as they could. And all we needed was one person to walk into a rotor blade. Not only would it have been really messy, it would have freaked a lot of people out, but it would have disabled the chopper, which would have then ruined the landing site. We had stopped the leakage, but we still had all these people staged and ready to go out on the helicopter. We were telling them to sit down and wait. We probably had, I don't know, 400, 600 waiting for the next helicopters, thinking they were going to go out, us knowing they ain't going out. That's what the pilots are telling us as they fly in, you know. Hey, there's only going to be a few more helicopters. You got to get yourselves out. So we staged them, and the embassy had a rocket screen that rolled down, like a storm screen, rolled straight down. Also, the doors were big, heavy teakwood doors that opened. We took the people and we got them all staged out on the far side of the parking area. And then we had a secondary area that was full of people who were staged in the CRA area. Now we got everybody basically set and waiting, and we decided we're going to have to get out. So we made 3 arcs of Marines around, including the brigade of Marines we had. Now we've got lots of leakage, people coming over the walls, and we've got these 3 lines of Marines. So the first line goes in the building, and then the second line goes in the building, and then the third line that I was in, we were trying to get in the building when everybody realized that we were leaving, and they weren't going. So now we're trying to get in the building, and this devolves into, you know, rifle butting people who are caught in the doorway and kicking them and punching them and doing everything we can to get those doors to shut. You know, throughout this whole operation, we were fairly well armed, but we were a small defense force. That's what our responsibility was as MSGs. We were there to provide for the security and the defense of the facilities and the personnel. That was our job. We get in the building, we're all going up this stairwell, and as the stairwell of the embassy, for security purposes, it had doors that we would close behind us, gate doors. We all get up to the rooftop, and it's probably, 5 o'clock in the morning. In the days prior to this, the airport had been hammered by heavy artillery, we'd get hit by rockets. Now we're up on a roof, and as Marines know, the training kicks in, and you do what you're trained to do. You just do it. We get up to the rooftop, another helicopter comes in, picks up some of the Marines. When you're moving, and when you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, you're really not contemplating your fate, right? I speak for myself here. But when you're laying on a rooftop with nowhere to go, and you can see fire around you, and you know people are desperate. The rooftop door was in that blockhouse. So that hallway was full of people. And we were pepper spraying them to try to keep them away from the door. We blockaded the door. There was a little window in the door. We were looking through the window. We could see them all in there. We broke the glass and we were spraying pepper spray in there and stuff. Again, now we're laying on the roof. There's nowhere to go. And I'm thinking, well, let's see. They could lob an artillery shell into us very easily. Just blow us right off of this building. This is all very real. It's all happening real time. And then you're thinking, well, these people that are in the building are really upset. And then there's a big bang. They took the fire engine that had been parked on the far end of the parking lot. Someone had left the keys in it, and they drove it right through the front door of the embassy. So it blew the doors open. Now, all these people are coming out. So our embassy is full. We're looking down and we're watching the looting going on from underneath us, desks and whatever they can put their hands on. So now, no helicopters. We're laying there. It's early morning. It's dawn. No cell phone. We destroyed all our communications equipment. We had to destroy all the classified. They were all put into burn barrels and all that stuff, just like procedure. So I'm laying there and I'm thinking, well, is this going to be an Alamo or what's going to happen up here? So then Major Keene, who I'm sure sensed what was going on, he got everybody's attention and he told us, he said, we're here, we're going to do our job, and we're going to fight, and if necessary, we're going to fight like Marines, and we're going to die like Marines, quote unquote. I remember hearing him say that, thinking, there is nowhere to run, there is no cover, there's nowhere to hide, and we're on a fucking plateau on one of the highest cities one of the highest buildings in the city. I remember thinking about that, and that's the only time that I really felt fear. Because all the other times, I was working hard. I was doing my job, I was being a good Marine, I was doing everything I was trained to do. I was there, I served, I did what I was supposed to do. We carried out our mission flawlessly. We did exactly what we were trained to do. And that's it, man. It's over. It's past. So now what about the future? Where do you go now? Having a place to go, some vector that you can follow that brings people together, that encourages them to talk to each other, will probably reduce your fatality rate. Because if one's committed suicide, there'll be more. There'll be more. If they have a reason to come together, how many times can I say it? What can I tell you? Any more questions?
I think that's good.
That was awesome. Thank you.
My name is Ken Krause. I was a Lance Corporal and had been in the Marine Corps for just shy of 2 years at the time of Operation Frequent Wind, which was the evacuation of Saigon. I'd only been in Saigon for about 60 days at the time of the evacuation, so was rather junior in the group. We lived in the Marine House, as a 6-story apartment building that was a few blocks from the embassy, and with about 3 days left to go, they moved us all into the embassy compound and remained there for the rest of the time through the evacuation. Once the evacuation got underway, I was assigned to the roof of one of the interior walls. Next door to us was the Vietnamese police station, where personnel that were at risk, police officers and others, would form and then come over this interior wall so that they didn't have to come in through the crowds. And so I would be on the second floor of the interior building. And then as the CH-53s would land in the parking lot, they would give me a signal and we would run groups of 15 or 20 down some stairs and then directly on to the CH-53s, and then they would lift off from there. That started late in the afternoon of the 29th of April, and just continued nonstop until I looked over into the parking lot. And at one point, they popped a red flare to pull everybody inside the embassy building. We collapsed inside the embassy. They closed the bomb doors, put a big barricade over the door, moved us all up to the roof. And at that point, there was about 170 Marines on the roof. And we waited until our individual times to be lifted. From there, we lifted out to the 7th Fleet. I was initially dropped off on the Duluth, and from there cross-checked to the USS Blue Ridge. The Blue Ridge was the flagship of the 7th Fleet. Because we were attached to the Marine Security Guard unit, we were considered embassy staff. And so we stayed with the Blue Ridge until we got to Manila. In Manila, we stayed for a few days and then were given our orders to move on to the next, our next assignment.
Where were you getting most of your information from for this stuff, like as things were unfolding? Were you getting it from like the staff sergeant, the gunny? Like who was telling you guys what was going on?
It's actually kind of an interesting side story of that, because my grandfather was a businessman in San Francisco and felt that everybody should read the Wall Street Journal. So he subscribed me to the Wall Street Journal and sent it to the Marine House in Saigon. And because it was published in Hong Kong, I would get the Wall Street Journal like a day or two late. Now we're getting information out of the embassy that everything's going great. Saigon is going to remain and everything's going fine. I can remember getting called into a secured conference room, a big bubble room. We were all pulled in on this one thing, and the ambassador or somebody from his staff came in and said, "Don't sweat it. You're going to serve out your entire time." And so there was all this, the talk that we received was, "Don't worry about it, everything's going fine." I'd read the Wall Street Journal and things weren't going fine. I would just kind of, oh well, it doesn't affect me, it is what it is. I never really reached a point of, oh my gosh, the sky is falling or any of that kind of stuff. We're aware of the tension, we're aware of what was going on, but never to the point that it like panicked us individually, I don't think.
What was going through your head when you flew out on that helicopter?
In hindsight, I wasn't aware of it. I've thought back on that, and my main thought was one of relief. Just personal relief. I'm looking around, I'm on the helicopter. Good, that's over with. And I never had a sense of the significance of the event even. I didn't get a sense of this is the end of Vietnam. We were just so engaged in the moment, engaged in the mission, that anything outside of that was not part of my thought process. And I was 19 and a half. Our attention was very outwardly focused, helping people, doing things like that. In isolation, your thoughts are all internal, and you got to turn them out. And whether it's an event like this or other gatherings, for me, I went on with life for about 20 years and went through a divorce, a number of drinking issues and other things like that. It was actually 18 years. In 1993, I had a friend of mine suggest I get involved with trail running. And I told this person, I said, well, I don't know anything about it. I don't know the trails. This was somebody who was in Alabama, and I lived in Sacramento. And they said, well, I'll give you a phone number for 2 people. Just volunteer and start helping. So I did. I called up 2 race directors. One was for the American River 50-mile endurance run. The other one was for the Western States 100-mile endurance run. And I felt so engaged with these groups because I was then helping again. People would come into an aid station, they'd be totally gassed, and I'd just, even a cold sponge, something like that, feed them cold water, doing something, engaging in the process, where again, my attention was turned outward instead of inward. And I found such help with that. And each person's different. That was me. And so I got involved with trail running. 4 years later, I ran the American River 50-mile endurance run for the first time, and I finished it 20 times. 5 years later, I ran the Western States 100-mile endurance run the first time and finished that 3 times. After that, I was the safety team coordinator for the Western States 100-mile endurance run for about a decade. Actually, it's 12 years, minus 2 years when I was running the event. And so there's this process of, like the safety team coordinator, for example, I would be developing teams that were helping out at the race along the trail. I'd recruit doctors, I would recruit first aid people, I would recruit other people that knew the trails real well. And so again, the focus and energy was outward instead of inward. The other thing with trail running is that there's a couple of things, one of which is the quality of people that you're engaging with. If you're going to go to the start line of a 100-mile endurance run, it pretty well predefines who you're hanging out with. You're not going to find those people in the bars. And if you're going to train to do something like that, you're going to go on some really long runs. And it's the same process. Very deep friendships. We're on a Saturday morning. You're going to meet somebody, you're going to spend the next 10 hours with them. Way up in the mountains. A lot of thought, a lot of time to reflect. And I've told people who have burdens they're carrying, if you go up in the mountains and go for 6, 8, 9, 10 hours, those hard, rough corners that you carried with you will get rounded out. And if one day helps, do it next Saturday. Do it the next year. And I've run ultra marathons now since 1996.
I'm Colonel Steve Hasty, United States Marine Corps, retired. In 1975, I was a staff sergeant, and I was detachment commander of the Marine detachment at the consulate in Can Tho, Vietnam. And I went on the Marine Security Guard program. I did 2 tours in Saigon. When I got out after a couple of months, they assigned me to the detachment at the embassy in Bangkok. And then in September of 1974, my commanding officer asked me if I wanted to go back to Vietnam. And I said, yeah, sure. So I was sent to open up the new detachment at the new consulate in Can Tho, which was down in the delta of Vietnam, south of Saigon.
How long were you there before the consulate came under fire?
Well, you know, the conflict never really ended. The majority of American forces left in March of 1973. You know, by that time, we were the only ones left. We waved goodbye to everybody. But the war never stopped. It's just that we weren't, you know, as heavily involved in it. Everybody knew it was, you know, things were collapsing.
Did you ever think to yourself that maybe there was a chance that they would send American troops back to reinforce the South Vietnamese?
No chance in hell. Kissinger and Nixon, they wanted the war over. That was a combination of cranking out the bombing, cranking up the bombing. For the first time, we sent B-52s over Hanoi and Haiphong. Hadn't done that during the course of the war. So we were hammering them hard, and at the same time in Paris, the negotiations were going on. And essentially the administration kind of cut out the Vietnamese, the South Vietnamese from that. Everybody wanted out. Congress was, you know, adamant that we leave. The writing was on the wall. It was clear. Nobody's coming back. Nobody's coming to help. There wasn't any defense industry there. It was all coming from us.
Did any of the Marines that were on Marine Security Guard duty have local girlfriends or relationships?
Yeah, every one of them. Every one of them. I was one of them. I married a South Vietnamese. New shit was coming down, so I wanted to get her and her family out, and I was able to do that. A lot of the others, same thing. I was able to get my wife out through the airlift at Tan Son Nhut Air Base. Tan Son Nhut in Saigon, that was the big Air Force base, the main runways, everything.
Did the consulate down there ever come under artillery bombardment?
Oh, yeah. Starting around the 1st of April, things were starting to get hairy. I drove up, which turned out to be my last trip up to Saigon by vehicle. I drove up to get scrounge all the ammo and, you know, extra weapons and so forth I could find. And I was with a staff sergeant from the embassy there, their detachment. And as we're driving past the Air America terminal at Tan Son Nhut, Air America was the CIA's Air Force there. And we saw a ton of ambulances pulling up, vehicles pulling up. And my first thought was, oh shit, Phnom Penh, Cambodia's been hit, you know, and they're bringing them, because we knew they were going down too. So I pulled in, see if I could help. Well, it turned out, as part of Operation Baby Lift, C-5, Air Force C-5A, full of orphans and others that were being evacuated, took off. They had a pressurization problem, the door blew off, and the plane crashed. The pilot was able to get it down in the swamp there, but, you know, there were just hundreds of dead. So we spent a few hours, you know, pulling bodies, and we went back. They kept bringing South Vietnamese helicopters would land, you know, they'd load bodies and they'd bring them back, and then we would offload them and onto stretchers. And it was just meat, you know, just meat. you'd see the bodies and, the head, the arms, the legs, all torn off, nothing but a torso. And the only way you could tell if it was male or female was the females had breasts. The sad thing was a lot of the American women aboard that flight were wives of people from the Defense Attaché's office and knew they had to evacuate, and they volunteered to go on this flight to help take care of the children. Somebody had found a stack of sheets someplace, so as we would shovel the meat onto the stretcher, we'd throw a sheet over the top of it, bring it back through to an ambulance. But the sad thing was a lot of the husbands were there. They had heard and they showed up. And, the rotor wash from the helicopters sometimes would just blow the sheet off, like it was a ghost floating away. That was a bad day.
Did you feel like you guys were given the support that you needed to get out, or do you feel like it was like the Wild West?
It was a Wild West. We did it ourselves. Example, there was supposed to be a Navy destroyer meet us, off the mouth of the Massac River to pick us up. Well, it's, sundown, and we hit the mouth of the Massac into the South China Sea. There's nobody there. We had one radio. We could hear, the South Vietnamese traffic of, fire bases being overrun, things being overrun. There were, explosions going off, flares going up, so there was no turning back. We had a choice to make. Do we head for the Philippines and hope we make it? Or do we head north and hope we find the 7th Fleet someplace? Well, about 3 o'clock in the morning, I guess, 2 or 3, I spotted some lights in the distance. And I said, I think that's a ship. So we altered course, headed for it. It turned out to be the Pioneer Contender, which was basically a merchant ship that had been used to bring evacuees out of Da Nang and I think Nha Trang too. We pulled up to it and in the darkness, and somebody up top, I said, it looks like a Marine. And he hollered down, who are you? And I said, we're the, Consulate General Canto. And he said, oh, okay, we'll bring you aboard and throw all your weapons into the ocean if you have any. And at that point, I'd been without sleep for a while. I was sunburned, I was tired, I was pissed off, and I screamed back, we're Marines and we're coming aboard with our weapons. And we did. We literally racked out on the metal. We were so exhausted. Got up, woke up a few hours later. There was a Marine detachment aboard the ship. So we helped them during the course of the day as they sailed north, and we started running into a lot of Vietnamese boats, people trying to get out.
Have you stayed in touch with a lot of the guys that you evacuated that consulate with?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Ambassador McNamara and I were kept in close touch because I lived here, he lived here. The rest of the Marines, after we were finally we had a weird trip. We went from the Pioneer Contender, a Japanese tugboat picked us up, took us to a Korean LST where we spent the night, and then the next day U.S. helicopters came and picked us up off the LST and took us to the USS Blue Ridge, which was the flagship of the 7th Fleet. And from there we sailed on to Subic Bay in the Philippines. Our Vietnamese that we evacuated stayed aboard the Pioneer Contender and went to Guam, which was the big refugee. They flew the Marines to Manila, to the embassy, and we basically stayed there for a couple of weeks, just racking out wherever we could. Those whose time on their MSG duty was up were going back to the States for reassignment. All the others who still had time on the program to go received orders to other embassies around the world. And you got to remember, this is 1975. There's no internet. So yeah, we lost touch. And it was via social media, 20-something years later, that we were able to reconnect. And we formed an organization called the Fall of Saigon Marines in honor of Judge McMahon. And we would collect money to donate for scholarships and things like that in their name. Everybody had some form of PTSD to one degree or another. I mean, there's no way you're going to escape it. We were, in a way, disadvantaged because we all split to the four winds and, in most cases never talked to, saw, or heard of anybody for the next 25 years. So everybody had to deal with it individually. Nobody knew what the hell PTSD was back then. You just had to suck it up and drive on. And, 80-something people in our unit that were left at the last. Out of that, we've had, I think, 6 suicides. We've got one doing life in prison for murder. But the rest manage to drive on and be successful in their life. I was very lucky because I stayed in the Marine Corps. Vietnam was just the first of many for me. You know, I'd done Vietnam, I'd done Desert Storm, Operation Provide Comfort, I did Somalia, Bosnia, Haiti, Kosovo, Iraq again, 2 tours in Afghanistan. Actually, in many ways, the PTSD I had was an advantage for me. I was always anticipating something going wrong, which helped me do a lot of things right. You know, all my leadership were Vietnam veterans. They had been through worse shit than I had. So it was a brotherhood of pains, you might say. You know, we took the lessons learned from combat, you know, to incorporate in training the new Marines. That was pretty much it. You know, there really wasn't any therapy or psychiatrist or anybody else. And God knows, you know, the Marine security guards were just the last in a long line of people that had gone through very stressful, you know, situations.
I'm Sergeant Ian Forrest. I was with Victor 1-8 in HKIA, Operation Allies Refuge. I was with the Scout Sniper Platoon, Eagle 2, and my title was Assistant Team Leader. And what I did is I provided guardian angel with the sniper team at both North Gate and East Gate. We searched the crowds, looking for anything suspicious and anything that kind of looked for a threat. And our job would be to radio up or neutralize the threat if there was a reasonable suspicion that they would harm.
Did you guys go to Arifjan?
We were put in Al Jaber. That's where we kind of staged in Kuwait, and then when it came to the flight to Afghanistan, we had to move to Ali al-Asim, and then from there we waited. A lot of frustration there because essentially what happened was the unit got cut in half. Alpha and Charlie got to go into Afghanistan first. So like when we got the word, they left like almost like the next day, and then like a day or two later, we geared up from Al Jaber to go to Ali al-Asim. We were all in the terminal, and then they were like, "Oh, they don't have a flight for us." So they put us in rooms for a night, and they're like, "Guaranteed, we're going to have a flight for tomorrow." We come back out, and they were all geared up and ready, staged, waiting for a plane to arrive, and we got told, like, nope, not tonight, the next day. And it frustrated because we would see planes coming in and out, and it's just like, well, what the hell is going on? Our unit was split. We were seeing on the news our boys over there, they were struggling, taking contact, or they were fighting to take the airfield, and we were just sitting there like, you know, they're our brothers, they're the other half of us. And then we got to go. We got staged onto the C-17 on the tarmac for like 2 hours in the sun, baking. I swear to God, I almost heat cased. I was sweating bricks. Then we started flying over there. It starts getting late. Now we're at like an altitude. So all the sweat and everything that we had from hanging out on the tarmac, now we're freezing. And once we start getting closer, we kind of hear it's like, oh, 30 minutes and then we're going to get ready to land. We all make sure that we're awake and ready to go. All we know is at that time is like we thought the airfield was overrun. So we are thinking in our minds, like, as soon as the plane lands, we're going to have to go out there and fight. So we got put in our barracks with people right next to us. On our right were the German paratroopers. There were all kinds of different nationalities that were there also participating in this. So we land, and I got to say this. The first person I see getting ready to, like, do anything was Gunnery Sergeant Cat. And I will express this kind of like a surreal moment, almost like out of like Call of Duty with our nods down. Like he stands up on top of the cargo nets. The ramp slowly lowers down. You could see him with his laser just kind of peeking out and like looking out. No idea what we were getting into. And then even then, watching him do that, like we all still got up and started acting like we were going to go out. And then this airman comes walking up the back of the ramp. It's like, no, we got to get this stuff off first. And all I could think in my head was like, we got to take the airfield. What do you mean? Yeah. And then we find out, like, no, we pretty much had the airfield. We set up semicircle, get a count of everybody, and then we kind of like started walking over to where we were going to be staying. So we slept, and then the next day we went on to like look at the locations, or I should say our staff sergeant, our platoon commander, and our team leads. They went to go look at locations to kind of like figure it out where they wanted us to be. Went to our first location, which is at North Gate. At the time we were there, it was just a berm with like nothing to really protect ourselves with. So we knew right then and there we were going to need sandbags. Yeah, it was pretty chaotic. Because the first day, for me, when we landed, because we landed later than other people.
Was it the evening when you guys landed?
Oh, it was late, almost into like the next day, I would say. Dark out, couldn't see anything. That even made it scarier, really. Couldn't see the situation. Even now I think more about it, moving to the little assembly area with our weapons and everything, we were being told, like, oh yeah, keep your heads down. There's reports of snipers that direction and stuff going off in that direction. You'd still hear gunshots here and there, and you wouldn't know specifically what.
Did they have any like sea wire or anything else other than just sandbags?
There's 2 lines of fencing that kind of like go around the base, or like that section. So there's like a decent, I want to say maybe a 5-foot gap, 5 to 6 foot gap between the 2 sets of fencing. So on the other side of the fencing, that's kind of where we stacked up our sandbags up against the fencing. And then also there was this kind of like walking bridge that connected, because there's this large culvert. You couldn't really see down into it that well unless you moved your position to like look down in there. From what's been expressed, it was just filled with bodies, and it was like a river. In fact, there was a point where I witnessed, like, I don't know if it was ANA or who, they were bringing what appeared to be like kind of like a dead body out, just like dropped it and it just rolled into the ravine.
How did the ANA interact with the crowds that you saw?
They were very aggressive. I watched them like shove, push. They had zero discrimination on, like, you know, where they would point their weapons, zero weapon safety concepts. Like, they don't believe in that. They've been fighting with guns in their hands since they were like 8. And their idea of warning shots is just shooting the gun wherever. They would point it off in our direction and just shoot. And we'd have rounds hit the berms and rounds fly over our head. And it was just like, well, what are you doing? Like, there's every bit of a chance that I could have gotten shot, my boys could have gotten shot. Like, you know, aim just above their heads and just shoot across, or they'll aim down the road and shoot down the road. One of the things I witnessed there with the ANA was there was a kid who had like a 2x4 with cotton candy stapled to it. He had sold all the cotton candy, and then the ANA guy grabbed the 2x4 and was just swinging it to get these people back. And then again, later on, there was an Afghan, one of the Afghanis who showing up to the north gate. He had like a baby in his hand, and he was kind of like trying to get in. ANA guy went to punch him, and this guy just held the baby up as a shield. And I watched an ANA guy just like straight up punch a baby. And all I could think in my head is like, man, I can't. I didn't want to be there in that moment anymore, because that drove me nuts. I wanted to go down there and fight them. Affected me a lot more than I thought. It really kind of like broke like a core value in me. Like, I don't condone any kind of violence like that, and it's yeah. When I think about the events of HKIA and I compare it to Saigon, and like definitely the collapse, like the speed in which both of those events happen were extremely fast. It is infuriating when you look back on it. Well, this happened in a slightly shorter time frame than the HKIA one, because the Taliban were taking over parts of the country in speed since April. You hear and you watch this whole thing unfold. For direct comparison, like, people can witness and learn from history that kind of exact same thing happened in Saigon, as far as, like, you know, there was a plan, but when the plan got implemented, it was way too late. I feel regret for not being able to do more, and it was kind of like part of being a victim of my situation. I wanted to do more. I wanted to be more on the ground and stuff like that, but, you know, my mission was to be there. I think back to like what I value to my core, and when one of my core values breaks, it's not something that you readily notice, and it kind of came to me after the fact. Like, I was just angry all the time. I'd go to work and I knew how to put on a good face and be happy, but in between times, I'm very much like to bottle my emotions and hide them from people. But in the meantime, the drives to and from work, it's me yelling, punching my steering wheel, just complete nuts. And then when I got out, eventually moved up north, drinking. still angry, hypervigilant, like I'm looking at everything, and you just hear like little sounds that might remind you of something there. Working construction, hearing like the sawzall, like, you know, bumping up against some foam blocks, and suddenly it just reminds me of what it sounds like to be in a helicopter. It was just something that was always in me, and I didn't know how deep it was. I had a lot of stressors, other impacts in my life around the time. I was in a big move. I had to give up one of my dogs. And it was Memorial Day weekend, so of course I'm thinking about all that stuff. All of it came to a head, and there was the point where I put a gun to my head. I was in an argument, and just all that pent-up rage and anger. My wife asked for my gun. I gave it to her. I called the police on myself, and I had myself taken to a hospital. I will admit that I felt shame and it's not something I should feel shame for, and I don't want anyone else to feel that kind of shame. I knew once I got to the hospital, I needed to talk to somebody. And I reached out to one of my best friends in the Marine Corps. She made me realize I needed to talk to Top, and I probably needed to talk to, you know, other people. I needed to get into the VA system and seeing therapy.
What kind of things have you done to mitigate stress since you left Afghanistan?
After the whole alcohol and incident, which I'm actually sober since that incident, never went back. I focus on like physical things that I can do to kind of like keep my mind off of it, hobby. But the biggest thing that I think helped me deal with these feelings that I was feeling about, because I hadn't even completely conquered them yet, was an interview with one of the members of the OAR Foundation, Chris Robinson, and I shared like, you know, like the deeper emotions about what I felt about certain events, and you know, I cried. I let all of it out. I let all those emotions out, all the things that, you know, that broke me down. And afterwards, I realized, like, you know, that's the best part of the healing process, is recognizing all the things that affected it. The thing that got me to put the gun to my head wasn't the specific events at HKIA. It was me losing my dog. But those events in HKIA were still there, and that was years later. My values were still broken because of that. You can think about something all you want, but I feel like even talking to yourself and expressing things in words outwards allows you to visualize what you're speaking about. And when you can talk about something like that, and you can visualize what you're speaking about, you can dissect it more and understand it more. In therapy, I already know the solutions, but it's just about voicing it and getting it out there and interpreting it in yourself.
I am Sergeant Markland. I was part of Operation Allies Refuge with Victor Unit 1-8, Bravo Company, 3rd Platoon. We were over there at the North Gate processing refugees, dealing with imminent threats and stuff like that going on at the gate. A really big moment for me was when we made it to the gate for the first time. I had no idea what to expect. Walking up to the gate, all you hear is like this loud roaring. It's consuming the air around you, the smell, crying, screaming. It sounded like a theme park in the distance. I had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. And then approaching the gate and seeing just the swarm of people fighting tooth and nail at the bit just to try to get in. I did not expect that at all from the reports we were getting or anything we were preparing for. It wasn't that. A huge reality check for all the planning we just did. It was really hard to sit there and give all of your energy to a specific group of people that need it, essentially. You have to process hundreds in a short amount of time. So you're kind of treating them like cattle. You're just trying to get herds of people through the fastest and best way you can. But many of these people, because of the situation, lost their documents, lost their loved ones. So there's a lot of situations where they needed somebody to give them a little bit more attention. I found this family. They were at the primary search section within the first wall of the North Gate. They were faced by Marines who were telling them, hey, look, you got no paperwork. We're going to have to kick you out. And they're all sitting there pleading with the Marines, and I walked by and just so happened to hear it. And I asked him what was going on. And he said, he's like, they don't have any of their paperwork. My job at that point was I could either do what I've done probably for the days leading up to this. I could ignore it and push along and say, that's too bad, it's just the circumstances, you have to leave. But I decided to give in at this point. So I gave in because the lady said, my paperwork's right outside the first gate, the first wall. If you take me there, if you hold my hand the whole entire time, I'll follow you, I'll go with you, we'll find your paperwork and everything in the backpack that you have. So we walk out there, and I have very low hope for the situation considering the circumstances and what we have in the environment that's going on. There's tons of people everywhere. There's people sleeping, there's people nodding off, there's casualties within this wall, there's people treating casualties, and just a massive crowd. We wind up walking around a bunch, and we find her bag, it's with somebody else. She rounds up identifying the bag. I grab the bag, bring it back to them, and it's a family of 5. It had everything that they had, that they're leaving their country and home with. That included all their documents, all their money, just to get them out of Afghanistan. And after that, I realized the weight in giving attention to little scenarios like that, because all the people I may have overlooked leading up to this, if I would have gave them a little attention like that, it would have made probably a way bigger difference. Making a difference for them kind of changed the way I worked going forward. I definitely didn't have the control of my life in my own hands, whereas we were in a secondary search section where we had to gate it off. And as we're opening the gate, I look to my buddy and I say, "Hey, are you ready?" He said he's ready. And it's this big carport door that slides. He says he's ready, we open it, and my biggest thing is I'm now in front of this giant breach of this door that opens. My biggest thing was families stick together, because we had to unite so many families, and women and children first. And they start piling in through the door. They compress me between my 2 bulletproof plates and my vest. We swing the carport door open, and there I am at the breach of this carport door. And there's just a crowd of people who are all very riled up. We have a guy over the top of the carport, this giant barricade wall, with a shotgun non-lethal, trying to keep the situation somewhat docile, so we can get these people through organized. As I'm saying, women and children, or families stick together. I get pressed up against a wall, flashbangs on my kid, I have my rifle in my hand. So now I'm sandwiched and I'm trying to expand my lungs and they're not expanding. And there's like a moment where it's like a primitive thing, it was more survival. I couldn't breathe for a prolonged period of time and I'm struggling to even get the words out of my mouth back up. So now I had to shove these human beings, which it was my idea, but women and children first. So these women and children were now on top of me, crushing my plates, and multiple times I had to shove them, and I realistically do things I wouldn't ever imagine doing, as much as I possibly could with my hands. After that, the crowd clears, there was a woman on the ground. I kind of snapped in a moment where I felt like, I jeopardized the lives of my boys or myself, and it just was like a mess. Very upsetting, but it was one of those moments where I was like, all right, we can't be lax about this, our lives aren't in our hands, and these things are way bigger. It's not always the Taliban are a real threat. It could be just the fact that the circumstances of the crowd or whatever may be our demise in the situation.
When you went back home after the evacuation, you guys are back home. Like, what have you done personally to get, what's helped you?
So after the evacuation, when we got back, we felt invincible. We just felt invincible. There was like this intoxicating feeling where we're around each other, camaraderie that has never quite existed, that I've never experienced and didn't know existed, like took over us. We had like acronyms and group names and things like that for us. It was a pretty chill environment until a lot of my friends signed a 4-year contract. I signed a 5-year. So my friends got out a couple months after that deployment. So those 2 months were great. And then after that, I was stuck there for another year by myself. That was pretty tricky because I did pick up rank. I picked up sergeant. I was by myself now and with a new chain of command that I didn't necessarily agree with, as well as getting a boot drop and things like that. Just without my friends, I felt like pretty isolated in the Marine Corps, holding on to old values, the old breed, as much as I possibly could. But having the chain of command try to change things up from the top down, making it more difficult to train effectively and do things like that. There was like a time period in my life where I was just looking for everything to go wrong, and I didn't know what to do. I'm not looking at the sun anymore. I'm not looking for rainbows. I'm not looking for like nice things around me anymore. Music doesn't sound good. I'm in a weird spot. I don't know what this is about. I don't know what it is. I perpetuated feeling bad for no reason.
There's one thing that you wanted to leave other veterans of Operation Allies Refuge that you think would be beneficial for them to carry on with them into the future. What would it be?
Man, there's a lot I could say. You got to be honest with yourself. If you need help, don't be afraid to reach out, and we'd be stronger with more people that need help in us, a part of it. Give yourself small battles. Count the wins, not the losses. Surround yourself with like-minded individuals. There's so much I could say, but it sounds cookie cutter. Take care of yourself. Go see the world. Find things you enjoy. Seek stuff that gives you purpose. Fulfillment doesn't always have to come from our service or having an effect on what we know from the military. Fulfillment can come from anything. Find fulfillment and find purpose and stick to it.
Gunnery Sergeant Zachary Kapnis, a.k.a. Gunny Cap. I was with 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, Weapons Company. I was Cap Bravo in the operation of the withdrawal of Afghanistan. I was mostly on the East Gate during that operation, captured in a video pulling a baby over the wire. That went viral. Significant events happening in that realm for me was the relationships that I had with individuals there. Desperation sticks out the most are the children and the mothers and fathers trying to escape. And you being the person that holds the key in some sort of fashion, allowing either people to come in or leave. And then also exposing my Marines to an environment that is uncommon to everyone, from the top of the chain of command to the bottom. Nobody was really ready for the environment that we were about to walk into. From the people, the places, the smells, the desperation, the logistical nightmare, the tempo, and then also just the pure raw emotion that you would take during this whole time. That is what kind of leads me to where I'm at currently, is working through those emotions, working through those feelings. Daily struggle, occasionally, here and there. Things that stick out are just remembering, the constant cries is what kills me the most. And then knowing that my Marines left and right, they're feeling the same thing and going through the same thing, and you're the leader. And you're the guy that they're leaning towards and asking the questions, off the cuff, making the play. You're running a playbook that you've never seen, you never walked into, and you barely understood. So that's where I'm at now.
You had combat time before in Afghanistan before doing this event, and your mindset is obviously a lot different. You probably went in. What was it going into doing the evacuation and compared to your previous experiences?
Two direct, when in Afghan, you just know that you're fighting an enemy. Cops and robbers, you're looking for the bad guys. You're hunting it down and you're trying to eliminate the threat daily. Walking into this one, it was kind of you had to shift gears a little bit. You were trying to help people now. And that was right in front of your face. But knowing that there was a threat there, not sure if you're going to be engaged, if you're not going to be engaged, but the possibility is always there that you will be engaged, and trying to maintain control. In a combat environment, yes, it's not controlled, but there's a lot of control pieces that happens, especially when it comes to the planning of any operation, no matter if it's a local security patrol to a raid on a compound, right? There are planning factors that go inside that. Now, when you take this operation, you're kind of left with a dilemma of all right, what do I need to do? Maintain my security posture, but also maintain the mission of what we're doing currently, and then also trying to help people simultaneously to ensure safety of all.
Do you ever have any of your Marines reaching out to you, asking for help or asking for advice or mentorship that you served with over there?
Yeah, we're all disaggregated, we're all over the place, so I try to do a check-in with everybody. We call it a FaceTime beer. Get on FaceTime and drink a beer together and just listen and just kind of gear it towards, hey, do you remember this time? We'll get to a funny time and then we'll get to a serious time, and I'll start peeling back the onion to see their perspective, where they're at now, where they're at in their lives, if they're still in, they're still out, and kind of gearing them towards it's okay to talk about these things. It helps me, right? And a lot of them, they give me shit because they couldn't give me shit back then because they were in, right? And they knew they'd get reprimanded, but now you fucked with me going at this time, so it's kind of funny. But yeah, we try to check in with each other. When I compare the multiples, I think, we're trained killers, right? But not tied to emotion in my mind, right? I'm not tied to emotion. There's a separation. For this, you are in the emotion of everything. You're feeling, you're living with them in their shoes at that moment. Between the two or multiple deployments, it's definitely a huge separation of an emotional connection and what affects me personally. There's some sounds and stuff like that. But you want to talk about people, smells, places now that are familiar, airports, planes. Those are the things that reminisce the most, right? And even looking at some people, sometimes I'm like, man, is that? I'll have to double take. I don't know why I'm doing that, but that's just happening more. But so I would say out of the two, or out of the multiple, I think this one probably had the most effect over me.
What kind of advice you give the ones that are watching, even from both generations, even the ones Vietnam vets that are out there?
It's okay to get help. It's okay to pursue something, your faith in whatever you believe in. It's okay to talk, no matter who you got to talk to. Even if it's late at night, FaceTime beer, just call. man, just call. A lot of people will not understand, but people will listen to you. Getting the emotion out and understanding that decisions were made, they are not your fault. Things happened. I'm not saying forget about it, but I'm not saying you don't got to hold on to it. Holding on to it, it's cancerous, and it's only going to spread within. So get it out and get out there and talk. I talk. I'm in counseling, and it helps. You were given a task with little guidance, little direction, and you still executed, and you saved a lot of people's lives, and you helped out more than anybody can understand and fathom what went down over there.
You think that people take on the feelings and emotions and the way that things went down as if they were personally responsible for it, even if they weren't?
Yes. It's almost like unfinished business. One, and two, it's if I would have made this decision, would this have changed the outcome? That's something that I live with. It's hard to navigate those things, but understanding that when you made that decision, it was all with love and understanding of the situation and with your best judgment going forward. So you can't think about what you should have, would have, could have changed. People are living with that now. That's affecting them. It's all about the mindset, and just understand that there's positives, a lot more positives that came out from the one decision that the individual made.
Anything you wanted to add?
The evacuation of Saigon and the evacuation of Ahmed Karzai International Airport, two events that happened almost 50 years apart. But I know that we probably already knew this before we came here, that there was going to be a lot of similarities between generations, because at the end of the day, you could be a Marine from 1850 and then put them together with a Marine from 1950, and they're probably going to find something to talk about and associate with, you know.
Chow sucks.
Yeah, chow sucks. I'm not getting enough sleep. I'm cold. I'm hungry. I'm tired.
Where's the beer?
But I do think that there's a lot of important things that not only did we discuss earlier during the interview portion, but I think some important nuggets of knowledge, statements that were made earlier that are probably going to come out again in some fashion or some shape or form, that somebody out there who sees this video one day may benefit from. Because obviously everyone's got different levels of coping skills, everyone's got different levels of experience, everyone's got different ways of dealing with emotional and stressful situations. People react differently to adapting to their environment. Some people are more resilient than others, and the way that the military is in general is that you've got people that are from all walks of life. They came, some people from the city, some from the country. Some people came in, they were well off. Some people came in, they were poor. I think at the end of the day, like, there's a good solid baseline in that. Some of the things that you guys have done in order to continue to move forward and find some semblance of purpose and peace and happiness in your life is stuff that they will themselves be able to apply in their life. And I do think that that's extremely valuable. So I have a question for you three specifically about like your information. I know that you did get your intelligence briefs from like the CIA inside of the embassy or the consulate. The CIA were kind of briefing you guys on stuff. Outside of that, who is it that had the subscription to the Wall Street Journal?
My grandfather sent it.
The grandfather sent it. And you said it was like a couple days old.
Yeah, it was a couple days old, but it was page one Wall Street Journal reporting as compared to the way filtered and altered facts that we were getting at the embassy.
Yeah.
But it's one of the reasons I still read the Wall Street Journal. I just love the way, and I find the reporting to be very frank and thorough, well researched. And I look back now, that's what I was reading in '75, and you'd see, page 2 maps and stuff like that, and you'd never see those maps at the embassy.
We had no idea.
Classified information.
Yeah,
we had no idea. The NBA couldn't read the Wall Street Journal and realize what a great job they were doing.
Because we had no idea. We weren't getting news, particularly down where I was.
Yeah.
We were getting stuff filtered through in dribs and drabs. We knew what Da Nang fell, we knew the Trang fell, we knew Benoit pulled back to Saigon. And we knew at the end it was Saigon and us, and it wasn't long.
Yeah.
But, you know, the day-by-day blows, you know, that you would see in the news, but we had no clue.
One of the key similarities I've noticed was in Da Nang, there was footage that came out of aircraft taking off where people were hanging on to it and falling off of it, right?
Yep.
Same exact thing happening at Kabul in 2021, where you had Afghans falling off C-17s to their doom, right? And it was all over CNN, MSNBC, Fox. It was all over every mainstream media source. 50 years apart, same exact thing happening.
Different people, different kind of aircraft.
Yes.
Same exact thing. The desperation
And
of the enemies and the Afghanis was amazing.
Yeah, the desperation piece is definitely, in both situations you had an opposing force that there was really no reasoning with, no treating with. You know,
Retribution was coming.
Yeah, right. It was unavoidable. At that point in Vietnam's history, the United States had pulled the bulk majority out of Vietnam in 1973, correct?
March 1973.
Yeah, and then the same thing had pretty much happened with Afghanistan as well. We had pulled most of the large majority of Americans out of Afghanistan, and they knew that. Yep. They knew that we had pulled the majority out, and they also knew that the American people didn't have the stomach to want to push back in with another massive force in not only Afghanistan, but in Vietnam as well.
Yep.
So that's something that I find interesting about the two. And it's just more of an observation, like as far as like the similarities between the two events, and how much these two different generations of Marines have in common with each other, just innately, without even talking about like personal family stuff.
Yep.
Bill, you had said something about the ambassador was very hesitant to say anything about like, hey, we're evacuating.
Yep.
Like he wanted to avoid that conversation or that topic, and he's like, no, everything's fine. They kind of pass that kind of information, is that right?
Well, he was reluctant to give up his position that we should stay, continue to try to, or he should try to work a deal via the French government, the French consulate in Washington for a coalition government. So he held on, and a lot of people don't realize that he had a stepson that was killed in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And so he had some skin in the game.
Yeah.
And but he was a very stoic, tough guy who had his opinions and wanted to stick by his, what he felt was the right thing to do for the embassy. So he held on
Too long,
way too long. We all bid for that.
Do you guys know what the significance of playing Bing Crosby
Yes.
as the last song was?
Yes.
So
what did that mean?
Armed Forces Radio, we got, again, I don't know if maybe it was your rank or whatever, but when we were, the sergeants were all getting briefed regularly in the bubble room by the CIA, and they were showing us these maps as to where they were positioning the North Vietnamese forces, and showed us how they were coming down. And there was a decision made that that they would launch the evacuation would be triggered by Armed Forces Radio announcing that it was 105 degrees and rising, and then they would play Bing Crosby's White Christmas on Armed Forces Radio. Everybody would hear that, and that was the code that the evacuation was going into motion.
Okay.
And
Because there's no mistake in it. You know,
was that passed over like internal secure comms? Like they were passing that in the bubble room?
oh yeah, yeah.
They're like, hey, when you hear this song, that means that it's on. We're out.
That never made that particular song.
Of course not. Yeah, why would you?
That particular song.
It was like, here, shred this stuff.
You couldn't mistake that song for anything else. It was so out of, the norm.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, they were going to play Leaving on a Jet Plane or something, which, they played 17 times a day anyway. They do, White Christmas, you go.
So 105 degrees at rising, and you play White Christmas. So it's, that was what they did.
Now, you guys, both sides, had to destroy stuff at your locations so that the enemy couldn't get a hold of it. So, obviously, you guys were shredding classified intelligence, classified information, shredding paper that had names of South Vietnamese folks that worked with the Americans, burning
$1 million cash. Was that right? $1 million cash?
Yeah, destroyed communications equipment.
Communications equipment. And you guys had to do the same thing. You were tasked to do the same thing, right?
Roughly, yeah. Not as intense as what the embassy would be doing, right? As security wise, more or less, equipment that we had our hands on, that we fell into. Yeah, it was kind of like make it inoperable for anybody else to use it.
Yeah, like the vehicles.
Vehicles, yeah. So when we ran out of gas, we put sand in the gas tank, flatten all tires, ruin certain electronics within it, just so in the event that once we leave, you're not going to be able to use it. It's basically dead weight.
Yeah.
Things like that.
I know there were certain individuals that were like high value targets almost for extraction, right, in Vietnam. Were you guys given lists for people to look out for specifically in the crowd around the consulate or the embassy that you, like the ambassador, wanted specifically put on a bird quickly or anything like that?
There were categories of people. There was a hierarchy of people, of dependents, of State Department, DOD, and USAID, and all that. Those employee dependents had to go as soon as possible, and then there were, sensitive Vietnamese people who were identified. They had to go. They were really shuffled out pretty quick.
Yeah.
And then we were dealing with families of people who are married, dependents, and stuff like that, which turned into a very gray area. And that's kind of how we dealt with it. That's how we had to process the people and categorize and get them ready to evacuate.
We got lucky in Canton since we were the last consulate left standing. The CIA base there, they got all their people out.
Okay.
We started early.
Yeah.
The CIA guys were pulling their guys out 2 weeks ahead of time.
They saw the right.
Get them in an area, put an aircraft copter on it, get them and get them out. On the consulate side, Consul General Terry McNamara was very proactive in getting people out. He was very smart in getting the families of senior ranking South Vietnamese officers out ahead of time, so they could concentrate on doing what they were doing until it was time for them to pull out as well. We had the advantage of time. We were able to get most of our people out. I mean, God knows there were some screw-ups at the end that, were tough. We found the CIA communicator, still there. He was destroying, the CIA comms. But he had a girlfriend and I think a child. I couldn't remember the Vietnamese girlfriend. And he wanted to get them out. So he didn't get on the chopper with everybody else. He did his job to destroy his craft. And then he got his fiancée, and they got to the staging points at the dock. So, and then we were to get ready to pull out. We loaded everybody aboard, and we were getting ready to pull out of the dock and head downriver. And I look up, and all of a sudden I see a bunch of Filipinos running in. They were CIA employees that got left behind. So, we stopped, jerked them all on board, stuffed them down with everybody else, and out we went. But, there's always that weird X factor that crops up in these things. You can't foresee everything. You just have to react to the situation that happens.
Yeah. Did you guys have specific targets or anything? Were you being fed information for individuals that the State Department wanted? Or?
No, not these cases. Maybe once or twice pulling out of the crowd that I can remember, but nothing that's really significantly sticks out in my mind. Where it's like this person came down and was, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know there's a lot of NGOs over there that had specific lists that the State Department had provided to them, or that the federal government had provided to them to look for specifically because they had been some sort of high value individual that may have worked with the State Department.
Yeah, and that could have been post them getting from gate to holding area.
Yeah,
and then them walking around there. I know there was a couple side gates that were around that were makeshift. Blackgate. There's a couple other gates that were around.
out that I know some people were get pulled into that, making deals from that, but
backdoor deals.
Yeah, backdoor deals. Yeah. But nothing specifically coming from, I don't think, at least for Eastgate was. Not sure about Northgate.
Yeah, Northgate, same thing. We just had either paperwork or weird call signs we didn't know anything about.
Yeah.
Because it'd be like a WhatsApp group chat passing certain things like signaling pieces that you would either write something on your hand or hold something up in the air or tie something around your wrist. And they would hold it up, and then I had no idea what to do with it because I'm not in the WhatsApp group chat.
Yeah.
So I felt horrible, but I was like, look, man, I don't know what that means. There's a lot of that. Just computer paper with visas on it. That's really it.
Yeah, there were a lot of tough decisions that were made.
Yep. Most of you probably didn't predict the experience you were going to have. You don't expect, hey, you're going to go do this. Like, it developed very quickly, both situations, not only for the evacuation of Saigon, because it evolved very quickly, starting in January practically, and the same thing with Afghanistan. We started watching it on the news unfold as like towns were falling, and it was happening quickly, and they were just steamrolling over the Afghanis. There wasn't a lot of planning in place. There wasn't a lot of preparation in place. There was a lot of haphazard, figure it out moments. A lot of Wild West kind of moments.
Improvise, adapt, and overcome. That was always the way it had to go.
One thing that I thought that was said earlier that was said by numerous people in here, and this is something that's important for the people at home, is, regardless of the situation, you did a job, you did what you were supposed to do, you did it to the best of your ability, and you saved as many people as you could.
If you did that, if you did your job to the best of your ability, you don't have to back up the pay table.
Yeah.
You're not responsible for this debacle. It's pay grades way above you. It's a consistent pattern of us, betraying allies and screwing up. But hopefully the Kabul evacuation will be the last of that kind. And I know saying that I'm absolutely wrong, because it's going to happen.
I know you probably feel that way about your Marines. Right?
Yeah, I think for me it's more or less like what a lot of guys I think are going through across the board. I know I went through it. Decisions on the ground at either at the small unit level or even as a platoon sergeant, platoon commander level, making the decision on the ground to, if I do X, will Y happen? If I do something else, right? What's the outcome going to be? And then walking away from that situation, walking away from the chaos and saying, man, what happened? If I would have done this, right? And armchair quarterback it from when you're back sitting in the kitchen, drinking some whiskey and just thinking about it and reliving it daily and saying, man, what happened at this moment? Could I have changed the outcome? Could have, would have, should have, right? And I found myself there multiple times, just kind of contemplating on decisions being made. And I find it, even if I know it's hard for me, then I know it's hard for the Marines, especially walking into an environment that is full of emotion, full of desperation, and not being prepared for any of those things whatsoever.
Yeah, two things really that I think probably both generations share is, we mourn the guys we lost. I think it had to be that way. And we all go, damn, I wish I could have gotten more people out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think on that note, like especially with just how the closeout went, unfinished business, a lot of us have that feeling. With the men and women we did lose, right? Like it was the same thing, man. It's like, man, what if I adjusted something, right? A simple, just one thing, right? One decision being made, depending on what that could have been at whatever level. Could have been, at the lowest individual level. And a lot of guys hold on to that.
Fate is there.
Yeah.
Like you say, woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Yep.
At the end of the day, it is what it is.
Either you guys ever experienced those feelings of like wishing you could have done more, or regrets, like you feel like you didn't do enough?
Yeah, I mean, it's frequent. I think there's a lot that Because given the scenario on the ground of what we were thrown into and chewed up by kind of originally is like figuring it out, getting familiarized with the environment and what's actually going on. Because what we saw, what we were planning for was obviously much, much different. So then beyond that, we're trying to control a situation, and control a situation like that, it's both parties are desperate. We're fighting tooth and nail, it's a however many long day fist fight. And then at that point, you start to let this side get to you, the side of you where you're like, all right, we're preserving military order and regulation to this, to this mission right now. So you start to disregard a lot of little things that need like more sensitive attention. But engaging with those families and getting family back together didn't happen for me until about like halfway through or a few days into it, to the point where I disregarded a whole bunch of other stuff I probably could have looked into, which bothers me because I think about that often. Stuff where it's like, however many babies I saw, we didn't know what to do with them, but I could have probably figured out a better thing than pass it to another guy until they passed it to somebody else. They got to know where everything would be.
Yeah, it's like you go through a workup, right, to train, fight, look out for each other, knowing that there's an adversary. You don't train to chaos, right? Like in that fashion. We did our rehearsal time, we did our prep time, but it was the flash and bang was very quick. So again, the whole adapting, we did adapt quickly, but just controlling that scene between, us and them, and getting our minds right, getting our procedure down in order to be successful. That was a very hard challenge for us to do. I know going into it. So, decision cycles, getting prepped and getting the execution down, and now making sound judgment, because now you understand your roles, responsibilities. That causes like a lot of effects on the back end of everything, where, man, if I was a little bit more prepared, the outcome could have changed a little bit differently. In my mind, right? When we think about it now, we think about, man, if I just had this, or if I knew this, or if I knew that, this would have changed. This wouldn't have happened.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But you can't.
True.
You can't dwell on that.
Yeah, you cannot. Yeah. Correct.
In Vietnam, in evacuation, I headed up the security detachment down in Canto, Vietnam, in the Delta. But Ken and Bill were actually in Saigon and had the same sort of thing, passing babies and the whole lot. How did you guys tell them?
Yeah, I think Bill, specifically, you were manning that gate, the main gate where the vehicles were entering and exiting from, right?
Yes.
So that...
it was a large metal gate, and there was people were packed against it. And at points in time, women were trying to get us to take their babies, or trying to encourage us to take their small children.
Yep.
If you can't take me, please take my child. I remember that very clearly, but over the years, maybe it takes time, I don't know. Maybe looking back at history helps. I'm not sure. But I do know that when I look back at our experience, at my experience, I really honestly, truly, in my heart, believe we did everything we possibly could. And most importantly, because our mission was predestined. Our mission was very clear to us. We fulfilled that mission. We were in a defensive posture. We didn't know that was going to come about, but when it all did come about, everybody performed as they should have, and we did everything we could. And then years after, I think over time, that's where I found a lot of peace. As Steve mentioned a moment ago, the decisions that are made with regard to foreign policy are so far above our heads. We are instruments of war. We are there to implement these policies. So we really don't have any control over that. We're cannon fodder in the end.
Yep.
Love the Marine Corps, love America, but we are subject to flawed policies, foreign policies, and in the end, as I look back over it, I don't know there's anything that I could have done differently. Seriously. in the position that I was in, given my rank, given my center of influence, I'm at peace with it. We did everything we could.
Do you feel like that period of time that's passed since then has helped, like, kind of like soften the wounds that may have been there at one point? Because I know that people always want to say the stereotypical saying that time heals all wounds, right? I know that sounds really cookie cutter and generic, and like, okay, everybody says that, but do you think that there's any validity to that statement?
I do think there's validity to it. I think in any kind of physical or mental trauma, over time, many people will heal, and not maybe completely.
You'll find a new normal.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is very important is support. So for me, before I met back with these guys after 25 years, from the time that I left until the time that I met these guys 25 years later, I had the support of other veterans. I was in a group for 2 years. We supported each other. There was a lot of intimate things passed between us. And one of my takeaways was that everybody has fear. Fear is a normal human response to a threat. What courage is how you manage the fear. In my mind, that's what it's. And I can tell you, over the first 25 years before I came back to these guys, we reunioned in 2000. Veterans and people that I knew who had served were a very important resource.
And you were talking about that earlier, weren't you? Like how like reaching out to people and speaking to people has helped you a lot?
Yes, it has. So some of my experiences, so while I was in HKIA, I mainly provide the role of guardian angel. And so it was a lot of watching and checking and making sure like people are, or in the crowd, like within the baseline, making sure like, is that person carrying 2 backpacks? Why does he need 2 backpacks? Or, why is that car sitting lower than all the others? But in the mix of all that, you're also like observing what's going on. And some of the things that I witnessed or came to a moral compromise to myself because of my personal beliefs and my values as far as like, when you witness something doing wrong, you want to go out there and take care of it. So when you see something like an AA member hitting like a baby, or just any people being shot over their heads, or like the complete total disregard for life in general, that affected me differently. For me, I bottled up those emotions while I was there because I was in the Marine mindset of, hey, I got a job to do. I can't think about that right now. Focus on the job. And I never got around to taking care of it. So when other stressors in my life came into me, or affected me, I should say, it kind of brought those out. It wouldn't be the final nail in the coffin as far as to what led to an episode of mine where I had pointed a loaded gun to my head. And my wife took the gun away. It wasn't the catalyst. It was the underlying. It was the foundation for the fire that set that off. The foundation for everything. It wasn't but after that moment, I reached out to friends of mine and some previous units for people I've known for over years, and then after getting some help there, I talked about all these things with the interview with Chris Robbins with the Last Deployment Project. And after getting all those thoughts, feelings, and emotions out for various different stages, like the fear of landing and the fear of not knowing what's going on out there. When you see crowds moving, you're like, what's happening? There's those emotions, and then there's the anger and the rage that I had to suppress from watching the things that you don't want to see.
Well, that's another thing, what you guys were talking about is my lane of interest is what's right in front of me and what I have responsibility over, what I have control over.
What you can affect.
What I can affect. And that's a big thing that I think is important between both generations, is that, look, all this other stuff that's happening way up here in the stratosphere, I don't have any control over that. But what I do have control over is what's going on right here, right within my left and right lateral limits, right? And part of that is your community and talking to people. I have the ability to pick the phone up and call somebody, just like somebody else has the ability to pick the phone up and call me, or let's go get some dinner. Let's go sit down, like just go like grab a drink, go bowling, go do something, get out of the house. Let's go fishing. Let's go camping. Let's get a group of guys together and go for a hike. Whatever it is, like that's stuff you do have control over. Not only does that bring guys together and continue to reinforce that community, but it's something that, it gets you outside. Because I think you might have been talking about it earlier when you were saying like a lot of that stuff was diverted inward, and when it was turned inward, you kind of like swallowed that black pill, and you almost fall into this anxious, despairing state. Whereas when you direct that outward towards, either helping people or talking to other people or doing some sort of service with other people or connecting with other human beings.
And hopefully not killing people.
Right, like connecting with other people in the community in a meaningful way. That seems to, at least based on what you guys have said from your experiences and from what other folks in the the GWAT vet community have said, that seems to be the thing that helps people the most.
Yeah, and in a way, although we both had horrendous experiences, the Afghan guys have a little bit of advantage. Because in 1975, there was no internet, there was no mobile phones. When we were evacuated, we ended up in the Philippines, and within days, we were scattered all over the world. Guys going to other embassies to finish out their tour, or guys going back to the States to get discharged, or whatever the case may be. But you guys have some cohesion. Yeah, we didn't see each other again for 25 years.
Yeah, that's wild.
But you guys are still tight,
I have been in multiple group chats constantly.
Yeah, exactly.
They text from
you use social media to your advantage.
Right, and then if I pick up a drink and I feel like calling somebody, it's really easy. They normally always pick up, which is 100% an advantage. And it's wild. I couldn't imagine 25 years down the line. I couldn't imagine in 2046 getting back in touch with you guys.
Well, hopefully that's going to help you guys through. We dealt with everything on our own, but you guys, you got a group, and that's the strength of the pack. The strength of the wolf is the pack.
Absolutely.
And you guys got a pack, and I'm happy for you.
Yeah.
One of the things that was talked about in a couple of different ways was like these feelings of regret, like I wish we could have done more. I wish I could have saved more people. I wish I could have, got that family that got turned away. I wish I could have got them through the gate. I wish I could have brought them on the CH-46. I wish I could have got them on to the airport grounds so they could have gotten out of there. Did you guys feel regret after Saigon at all? Like any type of regrets, like you felt like you didn't do enough or something like that? Anything remotely, like in that moment,
we
maybe
all,
not right now?
I think, did the best we could, the best we knew how. But yeah, I had regrets. There were Vietnamese I wish I could have gotten out. Couldn't do it. I mean, we got a Canto, we got a 300 and something, I think, but that was all we could pack onto the landing craft. So yeah, there's some regrets there.
In the moment, I certainly did not. And like we were saying in the interviews, once the 46 lifted off the roof, all I felt was a sense of relief. But I also know that we left over 400 people in the embassy compound. The very last helicopter lifted off from the roof of the American Embassy in Saigon around 7:58 on the morning of 30 April 75. Within minutes, there were Vietnamese sitting on that same helicopter pad waiting for another helicopter that never came.
Now, there's an Army captain that was in Saigon named Stu Harrington. Interesting guy, fluent Vietnamese speaker. And he was the one that had to keep them quiet by called the CRO area, the pool area inside the compound. And he had to keep them quiet while the Americans got out. And he did that by saying, yeah, don't worry, everything's going to be fine. We're going to get you out. I got to take a leak. I'll be back in a minute. He made his way up to the evacuation to the helipad and then went out. And yeah, that tore at him. Yeah, that still does. Yeah, it still does.
I know we've talked about kind of how you guys had felt when you were leaving. There's like a big, wow, kind of like relief. Glad that's over with.
And unfinished business at the same time.
And unfinished
It's
business.
Weird,
yeah, feeling like
weird feeling, yeah.
We did
Hey, we're
something
alive,
we're missing.
but God, we left people behind.
Yeah. And how about you three guys? What did you feel whenever you finally got onto the C-17s to fly out of Hamid Karzai? It's more like a shock feeling that just happened. And yeah, same day I was like, turn back around. We kind of want to redo it again, reset. Because how we left and what happened when we left, it was like we weren't able to pay it back, if that makes sense. Navigate happened. Everybody's fired up, but we had to leave. That's where it sits. That's like a rock. Yeah. So this is how I compare it. It's like there's 10 seconds left on the clock. You have the basketball, and you can either shoot or not shoot. And we chose not to shoot. And the clock runs out. That's what I think a lot of the Marines and sailors over there, right, that's what they feel. And in 4 years, sounds like a long time, but it feels like yesterday for a lot of us.
Yeah. 50 years seems like yesterday.
Yeah,
I bet. And even leading up to the withdrawal, it's like we live in the shadows of giants. Raised by our brand seniors who are now our platoon sergeants and so on. Like they have stories from Helmand, or Kandahar, wherever they may have been, and we're living on on the hopes that we could have the chance to do that. We're finally in Afghanistan and we left it such a mess. It felt like.
Well, there's rules of engagement, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on what you say. I was very lucky in Kanto. We were able to fight our way out. These poor guys, were stuck there and really couldn't.
We had rules of engagement briefed to us pretty clearly, and they were pretty standard. Hostile act, hostile intent.
Right.
That drastically changed, if not ceased to exist, when we landed on the ground. Because we would have like PID and stuff on potential threats that are being passed over the radio. PID being
identification.
Right, for vehicle-borne IEDs or possible people with an S-vest or a backpack with explosives. We were either looking at them in the face or watching the car drive by us.
Right.
And multiple times being told to either take cover or take an aim.
And that was a pretty frequent occasion.
Yes.
I can share a little bit about that. So at Northgate, there was a point where we got eyes on a man with two backpacks. And it was actually our staff sergeant Lily at the time. He was the one that spotted it, and then we started all kind of like. I was assigned to like really pay attention to him, and I was watching this man do some really what I would say sketchy.
Yeah.
There was no reason for. No reason from that two backpacks. He had a white G-Shock on his hand or on his wrist, and like whenever he would like he would meet up with this other person, talk to him. Every time they talked, they would make sure they weren't facing us, so they could hide their mouths, so we couldn't like see. He would walk off the field, and he did like a pass off to like a kid with this backpack. Eventually, a little bit later on, we were watching him practically the entire day, and he did all kinds of weird stuff,
just odd things
that really kind of like tipped us off. Like this guy's not. He's 100% a suspect. And no one else. There was a point where there was a traffic circle just a little bit to the east of the North Gate. There's a traffic circle, and I watched this guy come over there. He laid his backpack down, pulled out a prayer mat, and just started praying towards our direction. I didn't see anybody else praying. And to me that was weird, because like that's not a normal action that anyone should do.
That's the luckiest guy in the world.
Yeah. And I bet unfortunately like my time on that post was up. The next guys, we passed off all their information. They kept watch, and then we found out afterwards that that Staff Sergeant Lilly had asked permission to engage these targets multiple times because of what they were doing, because of how sketchy it was, like the way they were communicating and everything. we think that, you know, they just didn't get the opportunity to hurt Americans or to hurt anybody that was there because we had closed that gate down. They didn't get the opportunity, and that's what we think that they didn't act.
There's a lot about it that made it feel like a standoff with the Taliban or whatever their forces, whether it was ISIS or the Taliban, whoever. But we would have like PID on a gold Corolla with the license plate number, Army Intel. It was good. They'd give us the time it's rolling by. We would have it in our sight, and at the North Gate, we're about 5 yards from the main road that runs across the Alaskan barriers and continues. So we can't stop traffic. For some reason, we didn't stop traffic. It should have been stopped way before, but that's a different story. And this car is passing by, and we're told to take a knee. Pretty much just more cannon fodder. We're there with the refugees and people trying to get out. But I saw a problem with that because either way, if that went off, realistically, we're going to lose the gate regardless. So why not try to retrograde a little bit, get behind Alaskan Barrow? If we lose the gate, retreat to Alaskan Barrow. We still got each other, and so on. But everybody wound up just taking a knee, and we kept the gate. But multiple things like that happened today, and I don't know what we owe it to. We did have the Thor's hammers, the Modi, the jammer. This thing's amazing. We had a crew on it that would make sure that 3 batteries, we'd hot swap them after whenever, these batteries weren't dying. We made sure that we had somebody on top of that at all times. I don't know what we owe it to, but the chances were definitely against us with a lot of stuff like that. That's just interesting, and it's also throws you for a loop, makes you think for a minute, like, am I ready to do this right now? Like, what am I, an explosive five yards from me?
Did you guys have any knowledge or background information or know about like what happened in Saigon before you got to HKIA?
I did.
Yeah. Did anything cross your mind that like you thought about that situation before getting in there at all? Or
Me, no.
Not really?
Unfortunately not.
I think I was talking to my platoon. The writing was on the wall since maybe before we got on boat, right?
Yes, we were talking about it. We just didn't know it was going to happen. But I do have a Sergeant Major Young. He's a Sergeant Major now, but Sergeant Major Young is first sergeant. He's big. He's our company first sergeant. He's huge on history, and he saw it right on the wall. And he brought basically all the staff and COs, all the officers in that we had in our company, weapons company, and he was like, "This is what's going to happen." And he almost called it like to the timeline. So yeah, I kind of owe it to that guy to he adjusted our thought within weapons company prior to us going. So kind of got us looking at certain things, how we were going to deal with certain, but that was just within weapons company. Do you think he mentally prepared you guys for that level of intensity?
Not really. I don't think he like got us to the part where we thought we were gonna like what we actually exposed to. He just says that how we were doing rehearsals. He's like, this is not how it's going to go down. I think it's going to be a little bit harder than what we're doing right now.
It's hard to foresee the chaos.
True.
Yeah, those rehearsals were jokes. I was like, Kuwait.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard to anticipate people passing their babies off to you and stuff like that. That's not really something we prepare for mentally.
And again, like we talked about before, the difference between like the combat operations and then, the NEO happening, and the level of emotion that goes in between the desperation and then you're just fighting an adversary, right? Me versus you. You really didn't see that cross OAF, OEF occasionally, right? You might run into some pockets here and there, but not right in front of your face. And, you're also dealing with the enemy at the same time where you are, negotiating for people's lives to come in, knowing that that guy's going to do harm somewhere, but you can't do anything about it. And again, it's like I said, it's how we left, and not bringing everybody home, not closing it out in the right way. That's what I think a lot of people where it sits with. 13.
Was it an undignified? Did you feel undignified in the act, or did you feel that you did the best you could, given a bad situation?
I know the Marines on the ground did the best they could, right? I just feel with the significant event that did happen, it just hurts. Yeah, it just hurts because you want to bring everybody home, right? Because like majority of those people we have talked to, right? You have had relationships with, yeah, you know, passing in a P-way, seeing a cafeteria or the chow hall, or they're all people that you talk to, and again, you're going to that environment not really thinking that you're going to lose somebody.
Like I said, at the end of the day, if you can look yourself in the mirror and say, I did the best job I could, you know, I honored my mission, I honored, the Corps. I'm not responsible for anything else. I'm not responsible for the politicians' betrayal. I did the best I could within my sphere of influence.
Yeah.
That's all you can do, and you did it, so march on.
I appreciate you gentlemen traveling out here to do this event today. I think it's been very valuable, and I think that a lot of the things that have been said are going to be valuable to somebody out there. And I think that a lot of the experiences that you guys shared are also going to be valuable to somebody.
Yeah.
Somebody that experienced something similar, or maybe somebody that's facing some level of adversity in their life.
Or whoever the next board group guys has to do
the next
NEO evacuation from Toronto.
Or whatever it is. But regardless, I appreciate you guys coming. I know I want to thank the Operation Allies Refuge Foundation for inviting us to be a part of this. The work that you guys are doing is important, and it's going to help a lot of people. And I appreciate you guys coming here and sharing your perspectives and your experiences and pouring your hearts out, so that way other people can find benefit there.